Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptids and Monsters video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here. This one yet again based on a suggestion, but this one actually linked to one of my fellow YouTube crypties there on my YouTube membership site. So if you ever wanted to post any direct suggestions to me, if you're joined either my YouTube membership or my Patreon membership, then I'll be able to see those suggestions directly right then and there, and then I'll be able to use them later on. So thank you so much, fellow crypty, for this suggestion, and it has to do with this. This is a very fascinating case of a werewolf that apparently still roams around certain locations there in Tennessee. It's been around for a long time too, and you know how much I love specific locations. Well, if you go to a cemetery there that's located at a spot that I'll talk about more here in a minute, then you'll have a good chance of coming across this werewolf. So how about that? If you go to this spot here, then you'll either hear or maybe even see this werewolf. But it has to do with this. You're looking at a representation of it now. It has a very generic name, but it's essentially known as the Werewolf of Werewolf Springs. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating information associated with this creature. So what is this Werewolf of Werewolf Springs? Well, it's a creature that is again located there somewhere in the middle of Tennessee. You would have to go to certain areas known as Burns, Tennessee, as well as other parts known as Montgomery Bell State Park. And yet again, there's another location there, a cemetery, which I'll again highlight more in a minute, called Hall Cemetery, that apparently is also known as Werewolf Springs, hence the name tied to this creature. And then as far as its physical characteristics, it's this. Think of your average 100% caricature of a werewolf. Exactly the kind of stuff like you would see on TV or even on movies as well. And that's what you'll have here. This is a creature that stands about 6 to 8 feet tall, really massive, really powerful. Like when it comes to its top shoulders and then its chest and its arms, but then it also has a very, very long set of legs, very powerful legs too. And the way it moves and the way it interacts definitely makes it distinctful from any other wolf. For starters, it stands upright. Clearly, like you don't have many other wolves that do anything along those lines. And it'll also run on all fours, but for the most part, it'll walk and it can stand and it'll run occasionally, just like a regular man would. And on top of that, it does so at incredibly fast speeds. People that have seen this thing move have seen it actually just run about at speeds that are incredibly just powerful. Like it uses all of its speed to essentially run much, much faster than your average wolf would. And then as far as its let's say sounds that it makes, people that have come across it have stated that they hear just this unusual, very strange, but very almost supernatural growl that can come from this creature. And then it has also these kind of reddish eyes, if you will, and then these fingers that are very human-like, if you call them those, but they have those claws associated with them at the end. So again, think of your average caricature involving a werewolf, and that's what you'll have here. And then as far as its location and where it's found, you know how much I love those again. You would have to go to one spot in particular known as Hall Cemetery. And this is a cemetery that has almost like an isolated spot in of itself. If you go there, there's a whole bunch of forested area just surrounding it. Apparently, it's in a location called the McNair Cut, whatever that means. I mean, some of you that live there in that location know exactly what I'm talking about. But still, this area there is isolated in terms of the cemetery. You could walk in that cemetery today. In fact, you're looking at some pictures of it here. And nearby that cemetery is a stream. If you follow that stream, it apparently leads back over to another foresty area, but it has some caves. And these are caves that in turn carved deep into the ground, pretty much have been unmapped, and that's where apparently this creature lives. So it doesn't necessarily live right at the cemetery, but it lives close by. And the way the stories go, if you go visit that cemetery, especially at night, you'll know you're in the presence of this werewolf of Werewolf Springs because you'll hear it. It'll have some kind of growls or some kind of howls that are coming from those caves in of itself, and then that way you'll know you're within its presence. And then if it wants to even make its presence known even more so, people will see it moving about. In fact, they'll see it usually lurching towards the side of some kind of area. They'll see its eyes as well, and then that's when again you'll know that you have it near you. The good news though is this: it doesn't seem to be danger, like in terms of any kind of harmfulness to human beings. In fact, it almost seems to stay away from people that come towards it, or that it in turn accidentally comes across in terms of other people. In fact, it seems to be more territorial. So if you do come, let's say, across its location there at Hull Cemetery, and it makes its presence known, it's pretty much just doing so to defend its area. It's not going to really attack you, nor is it going to try to harm or eat you or anything like that. There haven't been any stories that I read when I was looking up the information as far as that stuff happening. Instead, it's just marking its territory just like any other animal would, and that wants to make sure that it's not bothered afterward. Now, if you want to keep pushing things and, let's say, go inspecting the caves or trying to hunt it altogether, I don't know about that. That's a whole other story, but at least it gives you an idea of the kind of safeness that you'll have surrounding that location. But if you go to that cemetery again, good chance you'll hear it, good chance you'll see it. Or if you go to another area, which is kind of a little ways, but still at a location nearby, it's called the Montgomery Bell State Park, like I mentioned earlier. That's also an area that's almost completely surrounded by forest, except for an area that is completely cleared, like an isolated area of just nothingness. That's also another location where you'll find this particular creature. And then as far as the actual encounters, as far as its origin, it has to do with this. I found this to be a little bit more fantastical. Kind of seems like some of the other legends that you hear about these kind of stories kind of mingle in together. But the way the legend goes is that there was, in the 1850s, some kind of train that was being operated by a circus called the Cornhog Circus. And in that train, they were just traveling throughout the country. Unfortunately, though, the train tracks themselves during that time period were just really horrible to be on. And so somewhere along the way, the train either derailed or part of its cargo fell off. Either case, though, it contained this creature. It's unknown if this was actually the werewolf itself, or if it morphed into, let's say, over generations of werewolves and the way it was breeding throughout the area, if it morphed into what we see now. But either way, though, since the 1850s, once that cargo exploded, let's say on the land, and it was released, then that's when these creatures populated that location, and that's where the Werewolf of Werewolf Springs comes about. Kind of sounds like, again, something straight out of some kind of tall tale, but at least that's the only known origin associated with this creature. That leads next to the encounters that I was mentioning earlier. Probably the most well-known encounter, or the well-known sighting, has to do with this. In the summer of 1973, there were two children there in Burns, Tennessee, and they were there in their backyard. The way I was reading the information, it was almost like they were playing in their backyard, but near the exit, like near the back way of their house, as opposed to, let's say, in the backyard itself. Either way, though, they were there playing when they noticed this very large dog-like creature exit a tree line, in other words, a foresty area nearby their house. And the way they saw it, it was clearly just completely different from any other dog-like creature that they had encountered. It originally walked on all fours, and in fact, it pretty much paid no attention to them. Either it knew it was there, as far as the children, or again, it just ignored them or didn't even know that they were there. But it approached some kind of compost pile that the family was using for food waste, and it started inspecting it. And then the way they saw it inspecting this stuff, again, made it stand out, because instead of, let's say, rearing its head downward as most dogs or wolves do whenever they're inspecting something from the ground, in this case it took its very human-like hands, again with those claws I was mentioning earlier, and it started picking that compost pile apart. And then it would specifically find little bits and pieces of food here and there, and then it would pick up that food and then smell it, and in other words put it to its nose up in the air and then smell it, just like exactly like a human would whenever it's a human, let's say, is picking fruit or something and it's inspecting it and smelling it. That's the type of interaction that it had. It was at this point, though, that one of them made a noise or something happened, and it caused this werewolf to suddenly turn in their direction. Luckily, though, again, as I was mentioning earlier, this thing doesn't really cause any much harm, because instead it was almost like it was staring at them as much as they were staring at it. It was almost inspecting them as much as they were inspecting it. And so after a brief pause, the creature then decided that it wanted to get out of there. And when it did so, that's when it just ran. It just bolted, this time, though, on its hind legs, just like a regular man would, like, let's say, a sprint, tracker or any type of runner. And when it did so at incredible speed. They never seen anything like this. And then it just ran off in the same direction from when it came, and then it just disappeared straight into the tree line itself. But that again is one of the most closest well-known examples of this creature found there in that Burns, Tennessee area or other parts of Tennessee. But that's pretty much it. That's all the information that I could find associated with this werewolf. It has been around for a good time period, since the 1850s, again, since that train crash. Interesting thing to note too is, it hasn't been there before. In other words, with the Native Americans that used to live in that area, there are no tales, there are no legends about, let's say, this werewolf creature. Instead, it only happened after this supposed train crash occurred in the 1850s. So quite a bit of coincidence when it comes to that too. But if anybody has any more information, anything else I might have missed, please post those comments below. And then if anyone is there from that Middle Tennessee area, Burns, Tennessee, anyone visit that cemetery specifically, maybe even that state park there in Montgomery Bell, then please post those comments. You know how much I love specific encounters that people have with certain locations. If I was there by that area, I would definitely make it a trek. I would go see this cemetery, because it does seem like, again, it's open to the public. I would go see it probably during the daytime, maybe not really take my chances like going at night, but I would try to find that stream and then also see about those caves, because this is great stuff. Whenever there's an exact spot like this, that's the kind of stuff that really interests me. So if anybody has done that, or if anybody has actually gone to that area in the past, then please let me know. Post them in the comments below. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.